Hey everybody, welcome to the first edition of Houston We Got a Problem. We have a very special episode for you guys with a bunch of wonderful people. I'm your host, Kofi, and we have Sean Thomas here and Javia Harris as our moderators. Today we have Pastor Zave, Nazara Rivera, and Dr. Tasha Jordan that are going to give their opinions and their views and expertise on mental health and Christianity.
In the news today, man, we lost a legend. We lost Debo a few days ago. Debo was a brother in Christ also. We lost a big legend. And I'll tell you, it's the funny thing about Debo is nobody really knows his real name. His name was actually, I think, Theodore Lister or something like that. Tiny Lister. He was a real big guy. As a matter of fact, he was a friend of my younger brothers. Okay. And we lost Debo. His name actually became a part of the Black culture, which is how we do things. You know, if you walk up to somebody and say, boy, I'm a Debo you, everybody knows what that means. You could be 70 years old. You could be 9 years old. You know what Debo means. But we lost the big fella a couple days ago. So we want to send our prayers and thoughts to his family, the bereaved family, man who had a wife, who had children. So we definitely want to keep them up in prayer of a culturistic legend in the African American. Is that a word? Is that close to a word?
It's a word now.
It's a word now?
Okay. It's a word now.
I heard they put funkadelic in the dictionary the other day. The word funkadelic, nobody knows what that is but me, because I'm from that old school. But anyhow, I'm glad to see everybody that's on with us today. Other things in the news, if anybody wants to chime in, just please chime in. You know, we're dealing with the COVID thing. And I want to throw this out here real quick before we go into our topic. What do you guys feel? How do you guys feel about the vaccine?
That's a whole that's loaded.
I mean, I can jump in and just say the fact that we have a vaccine in such a short amount of time, I think in and of itself is honestly near miraculous, like miracle adjacent at this point. I think it's really the opportunity that we have to be able to keep people safe. And I know people are worried, like, yeah, it was made really quickly, things like that. But the research in this type of vaccine has been going on actually for almost a decade. And I think the fact that we can actually have this opportunity to protect our loved ones, especially in the Black community where we are being hit the hardest, I think we have to really take that seriously.
Okay. Speaking of hit the hardest, there's been, especially in when it comes to Black media, there's been a kind of a movement that is saying that the numbers when it comes to African Americans has been distorted a little bit. How do you feel about that? Pastor, I need you to jump in on this too, because I want to know how you feel from a Christian perspective, from the perspective of a pastor, because a lot of people are saying the COVID-19 is actually a move of God.
I think we could really dissect 2020 from a spiritual standpoint. I know Kofi and I have talked about that a lot, but I think to talk about that extensively would probably require another episode. As far as COVID goes, I definitely think COVID is a real thing. I think there are parts of it that are embellished, absolutely. But I do think it's very much real. I know people in my life who have contracted COVID, who have gotten really, very sick. So I definitely think it's a real thing. I don't think it's some people say it's fake. I don't think that's true. As far as the vaccination goes, I am pro-vaccination, but I am not quite comfortable with this yet because it's so new. I'm up to date on all my shots, but I did not know. I know Dr. Jordan just shared that the research on this has been going on for 10 years. That's information that I just heard just now. You know what I'm saying? But as far as the fact that it was developed quickly, the fact that, you know, the numbers show that Black people are higher risk, which, you know, a lot of that different stuff makes me even more apprehensive to take it right off the bat. But I definitely, I'm glad there's a vaccine, and I'm glad that it's finally getting out and that people are able to take it and stuff like that. I think for me personally, I'll need a little bit more time on it before I'll take it myself. So.
And I need anybody to jump in on this because I'm gonna shoot another question real quick. And I know we need to move another way real quick. But why is it that when the world has a pandemic, when they have a worldwide disease, the face of it always becomes African Americans or the black race or of the people of color?
That's heavy. When it comes to the vaccination, I'm not gonna lie. The first thing that pops on my mind is Tuskegee experiment. You know what I mean? So it's like, why, why are we always the guinea pigs? Why are we always got to be the ones that they're trying to push these experiments on? You know, and it's as a black person, I'm always skeptical of vaccines. I'm always skeptical of when they're trying to push this stuff and push it on black people. Oh, you need to do this, is because historically we've always been guinea pigs to science in this country. So to answer your question is like, I I don't know. Maybe they're just trying to get us to buy into it and be the first to jump on it. Like, but personally speaking, like I'm like, no, I don't trust y'all, because like the way they back in the day, they said that black women or black people in general have a high tolerance to pain, and they did all these experiments on black women during slavery and all that stuff without anesthetics. I don't know. I just don't trust them. So yeah, I don't even know if I answered the question, but I don't know. I just think that they want to encourage black people, make them think that they're the heroes if they go and sacrifice their bodies for science.
Mm.
I think I definitely agree where there's a lot of built-in, I think, resistance to the idea of Black people being the guinea pigs, as has been the case in the past. But I think right now what I'm seeing is like the issue is actually the fact that these vaccines are being tested mostly on non-Black persons. So the tens of thousands of people who have received the vaccine to this date are those who are white or in the majority race. And I think the reason that they're pushing for more Black people is because they can't, in terms of generalizing whether or not the vaccine works for everyone, they need more of us in the studies, because right now it's harder to generalize that information that they're getting to all populations because it has been majority white. And I think what I've seen from like the Pfizer trials and things like that is that they're really trying to just make sure that the people who are getting the tests are reflective of the whole population. But yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that there's resistance to it. And I think, Sean, to your point of, is this like making Black people kind of like the face and like we have to save things? I would say, honestly, it's kind of the opposite. I think because of the spaces that we have been put in where we tend to be kind of the frontline people, whether that's in environmental services, restaurant work, people who are working in the hospitals, we are disproportionately doing a lot of those jobs and we are more at risk. People who have to keep going to work, people who don't have the luxury of jobs to be able to sit at home and stay safe from the virus. So in a lot of ways, we are getting more exposure and then as well getting more susceptible to falling sick because we already have higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of hypertension, the things that make you more likely to get more ill from the virus. So it's not that we are the face of it, but we are, as in so many things in this country, bearing the bigger brunt of it.
My wife's an RN, and she's worked on the COVID floor. My son and my wife both have had COVID-19. My daughter is an LPN. My oldest daughter is. And one of the things that they told me is that it doesn't make a difference what your sickness is that you die of in the hospital. They want you to label it as either COVID or COVID connected. Now, I'm not going to give her name because she needs to keep her job. But that's the reason why I asked that question.
I got a couple of friends, my nurse friends. Whenever something's wrong with me, instead of going to the hospital, I'll say, "Hey, nurse so and so, here's my. I have this, and this. What should I do?" And I've been talking to them about a lot this year about COVID, and a lot of them have told me about how really, really real it is. You know, I'm sure maybe in some places, like again, when I first mentioned, I said that I think some of the numbers are embellished, but on the same line, on the same spectrum, I have friends that are actively RNs in the nursing in the medical world, and they share all the time. Even just yesterday, I have a friend who was Snapchatting me on her break, and she was just telling me about how many cases came in today and how many people were really sick. And so I don't want to, like, at the same time, I don't want to water it down and be like, well, yeah, all these numbers are embellished. I think the danger in that is swinging the pendulum too far and not allowing the realization that there are people getting sick. And to me, at the same time, like the numbers, that throwing the numbers around is kind of, for lack of a better phrase, insensitive. You know what I'm saying? Some people will say, well, it's only 1% of the economy. Well, we have 300 million people in the world. You know what I'm saying? So 1% is thousands of people. You know what I'm saying? Those are still lives. And so that's why I kind of struggle with that a little bit. But that's just my 2 cents.
I will say this, and I'm not going to get too far into it. I know JV and I talk about this a bit, but it also you just reminded me of the dream you shared with me about the bomb. You remember that? Where you said that it was a bomb and it's like basically was creating fear, but it wasn't as bad as everybody was making it out to be.
Mm-hmm.
And to Coach Chi's point, what he said, where, and I've heard this before too, that whatever, no matter what it is, if somebody had a heart attack, well, they had a heart attack because of COVID, or if they broke their arm, because they coughed and had COVID and coughed and fell down or something like that. But it's like they always want to fudge the numbers to create more fear and panic, and it's working because people are terrified.
To generate dollars.
Yeah,
to generate dollars.
And the thing is, and like I've told people around me, I was like, listen, I said, if COVID is as can be as spread as much as is as easily as people are saying, it's like if you go to the store and cause people will wipe down their food and stuff they get from the store, whatever. I said, by the time you bring that stuff from the store in your car and into your house, and if they had COVID on it or whatever, you are already gone. Like you already have it. So it's like we can be careful. I think we do need to be mindful and take precautions to protect ourselves and other people. But I think that at the end of the day, it's like if it's as easily transmissible as they're trying to make it out to be, I think we already screwed.
But I think one thing we have to be careful of is not diminish the fact that COVID is real.
Right.
And COVID is taking people out of here.
It is.
I've got loved ones and close friends. The basketball coach at the school that I coach at, he passed away due to COVID. So we definitely have to be careful and not make the people think that COVID is not a real thing, because it's just as real as all of us sitting here. And it is taking people out of here on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. On a daily basis. To transition into the mentality of it, how do you feel from a Christian perspective the church is handling the issues of COVID and even the issues mentally of how COVID is dealing with people?
That's a great question. What are y'all thoughts, JV and Nez? What do y'all think?
So let me just make sure that I have the question right. You're asking how the church is doing in regards to mentally, like mental health wise, in regards to COVID, right? Is that what you were asking?
We're transitioning into it. Yeah, you're right.
So I'm going to be honest. I am not active in the church. I study my word. I do, I have my theology book and I do all those things, but to be really active within the church and to give an appropriate answer, I don't know that I can do that because I'm not active in a specific church at this point in time. But what I can see from my other friends that are active in a church is that they're overwhelmed. They feel like they're not prepared for something like this, especially when it comes to the mental health aspect of it, because these types of things, yes, you can pray all day long. You can have a Bible study. You can do these things. But at the end of the day, there's still a pandemic that's going on. And it's just new territory. When people don't know, they don't have any sense of control, it really brings havoc on people. And so it's just a lot of transition, a lot of learning all at once. It's traumatizing at the same time. And I don't know that our church, from the experience that I've had, and I've talked to my other friends that are involved in the church, they're just not equipped to be able to help their congregation like they should be when it comes to a mental health standpoint.
So the church that I attend in Hawaii, along with a lot of other churches, they transitioned from us going into the building to us having our stuff online. So for the members who want to get baptized, it's a conversation that the people from the baptism ministry will talk to that individual over the phone or whatever. They'll give the information to the pastor. The pastor will then talk to that individual, and they will set up a time for either him and the deacon, just them to baptize the person. So we no longer have meetings or gatherings where we actively go into the church, because the church that I attend, it's a huge church. Like, we do like 5 services a week just to get everybody in. So because it's so many members, we don't go inside of the church anymore. There are a few, because they opened it up to like 25% capacity. So the people that can spread out and that are comfortable being around other people with face masks on and all of that, those are the people that go in. But the rest of us, we are free to watch services online. As far as the mental health of it, I don't think anybody was prepared for this. Like, I don't think we said Happy New Year December 31st and then woke up. And all the tragedies starting with Kobe and then the pandemic and then Black Panther and then everything has just been, and people are losing their lives mentally. The news and the radio stations and all of that, all they're doing is generating more fear from the people. So now you see people who, I can't stand next to you because I'm scared you're going to give me COVID. I believe COVID is real. I have friends now who have the virus. I have friends who recovered from it. I know people who died from it. A really close friend of mine died from it. But I also think that if they are really sure about the vaccine and all of that, then don't force it to everybody. Let the people who feel comfortable taking it, let them take it. The people that don't shouldn't be forced to take it. So that's all. Like, we can't really do anything except pray and wash our hands, wear the mask, do what it is that the CDC recommends. But I mean, we are in a pandemic.
Does the church have a responsibility to speak and to talk to and to help the people from a mental perspective? Because you have people who don't get a chance to get on the computer, and there's people who are dealing with anxiety and depression because of what this world is going through. What is the church's responsibility, I might say? What is the church's responsibility to deal with these people from a mental perspective?
I can only speak from the church that I attend. I'm sorry, Dr. Jordan, like 2 seconds. From the church that I attend, since our church is so big, we have a ministry of people who are on the hospitality team that people can call in with their questions and call in with their concerns and all of that. But we also have to remember that people who are from the church, they also have jobs and families to take care of, as well as the church. So while they might not always be as available as other people would like them to be, they are available at some churches. I'm not speaking for all. They are available to talk to those individuals. But that's why I think it's not just the church's responsibility either. It's everyone's responsibility. Sorry.
No, you're good. And Javi, I want to kind of build off of some of the things that you said before, where you said no one was prepared for COVID. So I think, and to Sean's question of how is the church impacted by this, I think we're impacted just as everyone else is. We're impacted with increasing rates of depression, increasing rates of anxiety, as people have talked about. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, and we have to think about the church context in particular, because one of the things that church provides as a body is community, right? And for a lot of people who are deep in the church is their community. And what I have found, particularly in my church, is that people are really struggling because of that loss of community, where it's you no longer have the ability to connect face to face with someone. A lot of the people in my church are older, so they're living at home alone. They are really lonely, they're isolated. And I think that's something that's common within people in the church, but honestly with everyone, where if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we're supposed to be staying at home as much as possible. We're supposed to be staying away from the people that we care about. And with that comes a mental tax. It comes with the burden of you are losing that connection. There's the worry of, is my job stable? I've known so many people who've been furloughed, lost their jobs. Like, getting these ridiculous, like not enough stipends from the government that we're expected to live off of. And I think all of that, the anxiety that it's hitting the church, I think, in a different way, especially because the church has played such a supportive role that if you take that away, people are losing their coping mechanism. And I think to the point of how can the church respond to it, and should the church be responsible? Absolutely. I think one thing that's really interesting, and this is something I've been like researching a lot, for Christians actually who are experiencing psychological distress, going to a church leader is actually like the way that people seek help. So it's, if you're having mental health issues, like people in the church are not likely going to be going to a therapist or going to someone like me, like a psychiatrist, as the first thing. They're going to go to someone in the church. What does that mean? That means the church needs to be ready to receive those people and to understand what do we do when someone comes to me saying they're depressed, or what do we do when someone comes saying they're anxious. I think there's the counseling that a lot of churches provide, but I think it's really up to the leaders to kind of take the next step to recognize when someone might need a little bit more than just counseling and they might need to be referred out. And that's the training I think we really need to work on in this day and age of how can we get leaders in the church to understand and be able to recognize when the prayer and reading the Bible, that support is not holding up somebody enough.
I want to add something to as far as how the church is responding. I do think we are seeing several instances of where, for example, when everything started shut down, you have people that were saying you can't take away our right to worship, and they try to force services, and then people end up getting the virus and dying. So I think it's, in my opinion, I think that the role of the church should be more so of one of responsibility, instead of trying to take this righteous stand, like we're not, we're going to obey Caesar until Caesar try to take away our rights or whatever. And they're trying to create this false sense of persecution. And this false sense of persecution has cost people lives. And I think in my opinion, there should be a lot of responsibility and caution in how they approach this, instead of trying to assume that there is some sort of persecution that's going on. And the American church has a major persecution complex. Not all of them, but I'm saying in general, there is a persecution complex that some people adopt that has been very dangerous. So I don't know what you guys think about that.
But Javi described it in terms of her church, like really seemingly shifting to virtual. It's the response that churches should have had. Like they should have found ways to utilize technology, which is so readily available now, to still provide the ability for people to congregate and worship, even though it's virtual and distanced, but to worship corporately and to be able to still hear the word, still hear from their pastors. And I don't think, honestly, it's, if the church is doing what the church is supposed to be doing, it's not about coming into one building. It's about spreading the gospel in ways that we can get the gospel out. So there's still so many other options that I don't think it's fair to say that the church is being persecuted. I mean, kids aren't going to school. People aren't able to like go to work. We're not going on vacation. Like everybody's impacted, not just the church.
Right. And like there's several big churches. And this is one of the reasons why I admire what Zave has done. Like Zave has really, with his church down in Orlando, they've really adopted that and was really out there, really trying to impact and touch people virtually and just be a leader in the community. And you want to talk about more how you guys approached this pandemic?
Yeah, I think the response that the church needs to have is one that it should have had the entire time, and that's practicality. I think we have been so stuck on being inside the four walls, being on the cushy pews, praise and worship inside. And people say, oh, that's church, that's ministry. And it's not, it's not ministry at all. I've adopted the verse in the Bible where it says, what is pure religion before God? It's to take care of the widows and the orphans and to live unspotted from the world. And so what we've done is we have really worked, and I've been full-time at this church for 6 years, but I've only been the pastor for 2 years. And so I've been slowly trying to shift the way ministry has been done at this church over the past 70 years. And for me, COVID blew that wide open for me. I was like, yes, like I get a fresh slate because of what's going on. And so we kind of have like this church in the wild kind of mentality where we still have our we have our services, we stream virtual, we do our stuff, but we shifted our ministry focus to outside of the church. We've been working more on making sure, like this year we started some great ministries. We started what's called the Community Corner. It's a perinatal safe spot. And so we're able to help single mothers and young families with the resources they need, Medicaid, clothes, all that other stuff. We've been able to feed thousands of people this year through partnering with other ministries and getting them food. We've been able to be active in the homeless community. We just finished bringing over 15 bags to an area just 2 weeks ago and making sure that they have right in time for a cold front, by the way, and blankets and socks and pillows. And so we've shifted our focus to being like, okay, we definitely have to be more hands-on. Number one, people are losing their jobs, so they don't have the resources to feed their family. And we found out that here in Orlando, the average household has about 6 or 7 people in it. The average household. And so we were able to be able to get a hold of companies who are giving away food, and every week we're giving away 200 to 300 boxes of food, where that's had 32 pounds of it with all your basic necessities, with meat, with milk, all that other different stuff. And I think that's what I mean. I'm not saying we're the standard, because we're definitely not. There's churches that I know that are doing a great job with handling this and being active in it. I'm just saying it should have turned us to not only an outward way, instead of trying to double down. I think Kofi was mentioning before about like how some churches, and I know some churches, like for instance, like people may disagree with me, but the whole MacArthur situation where they're trying to praise them out, and where is it, California? That where they at, Kof? Yep. And they're out here and they're like, well, we're gonna worship how we want to worship, and nobody can stop us. You're not gonna persecute us. I'm like, bro, it's one thing to say, okay, we want to have church still, but you can still have guidelines. You know what I'm saying? When I saw them post a video in the church, they all packed in there like sardines. I'm like, why is that wise? Not only do you have to I do understand the right to be able to assemble, but you can still do that in a very healthy fashion. You know what I'm saying? I think JV, you were talking about how your church was having 5 services a week, so that everybody can get in there, so you can social distance, so you can do all that stuff. At least that's the minimum. You know what I'm saying? They're packing there like sardines. Like, you're not even trying. You know what I'm saying? So there are churches all over the country that are doing that and trying to just double down and be like, oh, well, we don't care. We're going to do our thing. And I don't think that's being a good steward of your people. And lastly, from a mental health standpoint, sorry, I'm trying to fly through and answer all the questions I didn't answer before. From a mental health standpoint, I think it was mentioned before, but community is so huge. Community is so huge, and it's the first line of defense. All right, it's the first line of defense, and being able to be active. One thing that we do with our church is we started this little thing where we were making sure that we were checking in on each other and making sure, like my deacons and trustees, I changed their title, I changed their responsibilities to making sure that they're actively checking in on church members, and that church members are checking in with each other. I know me personally have been doing a whole lot of that and just making sure that we all stay connected. On top of that, then of course there have been, definitely as a pastor, there have been people who have come to me and say, hey, I'm just trying to work through this, and we talk. But like Dr. Jordan said, I realized that although I am working on my master's in clinical mental health, I am not a licensed therapist yet. And so what I wholeheartedly believe in the immigration of psychology into the church, especially from a biblical worldview, and learning to just say, hey, I know there's several places that I know here in Orlando that have a spot that you can go to and get registered. I have friends in mental health that I've been trying to refer people to, and realize when it's out of your league. Sometimes you can just talk through it and be okay, but some people are really deep in it sometimes, and they need professional help. And so learning when to say, hey, cabin fever is a real thing, and people are really, really going through it and going crazy, and they're losing their jobs, and their anxiety is at an all-time high, and learning when it's out of your league and to pass it forward. And so I don't think the church has historically done a good job with mental health. But what I will say is that my generation is doing a great job of raising awareness, and Generation Z is doing the same thing as well, raising awareness to mental health. And I think the church is at a turning point where it's starting to be more proactive when it comes to mental health issues. And maybe some of the more conservative churches are still lagging behind a little bit. But it's important to realize that the churches need to be paying a special attention on the mental health aspect of it, because it is very real.
You're listening to the first edition of Houston, We Have a Problem. I'm Sean Thomas, sitting alongside Mr. Kofi Houston. Kofi, you've had some predetermined questions. I want you to ask a few of those questions.
Yeah, so before I jump into that, I wanted to say, to Zay's point, talking about mental health, I think mental health is something that we have traditionally shunned within the church. We kind of look at it as taboo. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we're too spiritual a lot of times, where we say, hey, you struggling with this, you either it's a demon or you prayed away or whatever, and we don't apply practicality to it. We just say it's either this or that, and we don't take practical steps. And so many people throughout the years have suffered from mental health and mental health issues that weren't properly addressed, or when they tried to get it addressed, they were shunned. And I do know there, to an extent, all of us have experienced that to a degree. And I do want to start with Nez. I know Nez has had some experiences with mental health abuse in the church, and I was wanting to know if you wanted to share a little bit about that and what you dealt with, like, and how could you have been helped better in your situation.
Sure, of course. So first of all, I want to say thank you for this opportunity and asking me to be here. For those of you that don't know me, I am Nez, also known as Coach Nez. I am a certified health, life, and anger resolution coach, and I help women. I help a lot of people, but my heart is for those that have experienced intimate partner violence in conjunction with codependency. And I help these individuals learn individuality, learn how to love themselves by gaining a voice, understanding their wants and their needs, and establishing healthy boundaries. So how this all came about is through the experiences that I've had in my past. And I've known Kofi, I want to say a long time, since we were like 15, I think. So I've come to him about a lot of things, and I've recently just come to him about some almost like epiphanies that I've had. I'm currently going to school for my applied behavioral science degree, and there's just so many things that God really showed me. He just kind of unfolded a lot of things, and I'm like, we really need to be talking about this in the churches, and we really need to be educating. So my biggest thing today, that if you guys, whoever is listening, for this to walk away, how important it is to have the congregation or leadership, especially, to have some type of trauma-informed care and a system of being able to refer out when an issue or circumstances are too big for the leadership to be able to refer out to the appropriate people. But the things that I have personally experienced, there's just so much. But one area is that I don't even know where to start, Kofi. Is there a specific example you want me to?
Well, so you've experienced a lot of trauma.
That's why I'm not really
here. And so how in one instance, like, you can give one instance of that, and how, where you feel like you were failed, and how could that have been resolved, in your opinion?
So I come from a home, a life of craziness. I've experienced a lot of things, and I've been in and out of church my whole life. That's how me and Kofi connected, was through God and Jesus and all the things. But when I would reach out for help, it was very much either I got what I deserved because I was sinning. The trauma that I experienced came to me. So for instance, when I was 15 years old, I was drugged and raped, and I had come to an associate pastor. And because I was at a party and I was drinking, that was my fault, because I was at a party. So your trauma is your fault. And that was kind of it. Like, you need to take responsibility for it and be done. So I literally spent my whole life feeling Like it was my fault that this had happened to me up until just recently, like a year or two ago. And I'm going to be 36 next month. So I held on to this, that it was my fault that I did these types of things. No one addressed the trauma that I endured, because this individual was not in high school. He was much older, and no one addressed this. It was all my fault. A 15-year-old girl who had come from a broken home. They knew my background, and that was kind of it. Like, we'll pray for you, we'll lay hands on you, we'll break the soul tie if we need to, and then we'll help you move on to your merry way. And that's how it was. And so if I can go back, or if I can teach anybody that is in some type of experience that experiences this, a leadership position, and somebody comes to you with this type of situation, first of all, in love, everything in love, right? I would say that I did not feel any type of love in this situation, and being able to distribute responsibility appropriately, being able to make sure that this person has the appropriate outlet. Because when we experience trauma, I want leaders to know that when somebody experiences trauma like this, that it changes your actual physiological being, the way you see things, the way you think, the way you feel, everything mentally, everything changes. And with trauma, trauma needs to be processed appropriately. And so if you're seeing that this person is struggling, or if it's too much, like, have a plan to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to pray for you today, but I'm going to help you get into so and so for counseling, for extensive whatever. But I really felt left in the dark to just kind of deal with these feelings and the unknown, and not the understanding of what to do next. I was really just kind of shut down. Okay, this happened. You were the one sinning. It is what it is. Now you have to move on. Ask for forgiveness. We'll pray and break the soul tie, and that's it. And if somebody would have just checked in on me to make sure I'm okay, that's a lot to process for a 15-year-old. I mean, for anybody in general, but to process that by yourself in quietness is really hard. And that is where those traumas that are unresolved, that's what develops mental health issues. uh, Personality disorders develop from the PTSD, those types of things. And they just tend to grow if they're not processed appropriately. So simply just praying, laying hands, reading your Bible, when it comes to these things, there's just more to it than that. So I really wish I would have had somebody to really just hear me out, and I guess just care for me in the situation, and direct me in the right place, and ask if I'm okay, and to let me know how to make things different, how to gain a voice in that situation, and how to verbalize my wants and needs and the desires that I had. And just the support is what I feel that would have been, like, made things 100 times better.
So Zave, how would you have responded in a situation like that? Where do you think that they went wrong, and what could have done better as a pastor? Your perspective from that.
First, Nez, I'm so sorry. You know that has happened to you. I'm so sorry, and it breaks my heart. It really does to hear that. I pastor a church in the inner city, and I was a youth pastor for 6 years, and majority of my kids came from broken homes. There are a lot of times when girls have sat across my desk and cried for a whole bunch of different reasons, and so because of all that, they've gotten me. I don't know. I'm soft to it, and so kind of hearing kind of your story kind of reminds me of some of those girls. Um, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I think that before I answer how I would have handled it, I think that points to a lot of the issues that stem from the church. Number one, the misogynistic, man, don't get me started. Like, just we see stuff like that happening all the way from Bible times, where they're standing and they bring this woman to Christ and say, "Oh, this woman was caught in adultery." No, that's Nez. That's not what's happening with you. But the premise is there's no male accountability. There's no, like, this guy did something wrong. He is offender. He's done stuff like that. They get off scot free, and the woman's like, well, whatever. deal with it. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. You know what I'm saying? It's the way that we've dealt with the way that women have been treated as long as it goes back is so backwards. It's so backwards, and it's the antithesis to everything that Christ has done. We see Christ constantly sticking his neck out for those who are oppressed, for those who are wronged, for those who, whether they were in the wrong or whether they were not in the wrong. We saw, that's so, Christians can be so anti-Christ, and that makes me so sick to my stomach. I hate that. So, if Nez was one of my 15-year-olds, I probably would have given her the biggest hug in the world, and we probably would have cried. That's probably how that would have went first. I would have asked her. I would have probably went straight to, we probably need to, number one, do your parents know? And if they don't know, I have a rule with my kids that I have a no telling rule unless their life's in danger. So that would have been one of the breaches in that little rule for me. I'd have said, if your parents don't know, we're going to go tell your parents. Second, we probably need to go get you a rape kit done and all of those different things. And then, when I asked, did she, I would have said, hey, we need to go see a therapist. You know what I'm saying? We're going to get you. I know someone personally in my life right now, and she is young and she has just been molested and she's a toddler. And I was explaining to the parents, you need to, number one, make sure that this is investigated. Number two, you need to get her seen a counselor ASAP. Because number one, as a parent, if you don't do anything about this, she's going to remember this. Because even though she's young, she will remember. She will remember. And she'll remember how you didn't go to bat for her. And don't do that to her. Don't do that to her. I'm shaking now. just thinking about it.
I went down. We had to talk you off a ledge. I remember that.
You remember, right? You remember that, right? Yeah. I'm not going to talk about that on the podcast. But that's what I would have done. And then I would have investigate. I would have the whole nine. And I just heard another story about a girl who was being trafficked, and she tried to go to her church leaders for help and say, hey, this is happening to me, and they ignored her. They didn't investigate it. They didn't go and look into what was going on, and she's being trafficked and being passed around in her area. You know what I'm saying? And it took till somebody else from the outside caught on what was going on and had it investigated. But the church has to do a better job of not this Pontius Pilate, I'm washing my hands with it kind of mentality is so garbage. You know what I'm saying? No, you're supposed to be on the front line. You're supposed to be on the front line, making sure that this is taken care of, and that if nobody else stands up for the person, that we got to be the ones that's standing up. Especially, it's the one. I know all the girls in our church. I know their stories. I know their backgrounds. I know how they're doing in school. I know how they act with boys. I know how they treat their parents. I know their relationship dynamic at home. If I have all that information, how goofy do I look to not be the person to step up on their behalf? If I know them well, if they have a personal connection with me, like they failed you. That's just it. Like they failed you. Whole through and through, and that's an understatement. There's more colorful language if I wasn't a Christian, if I wasn't on this podcast. You know what I'm saying? They failed you, and I'm sorry. But that's how I would have handled it. You know what I'm saying? It would have been immediate action, because that's what's needed. That's what's needed, and the church fails girls like that. And I'm not gonna say, I dare to say, not just girls but boys too. And the reason. And being in full-time ministry, I've learned this, and I've seen how church leaders treat church leaders who are in error. They back them up instead of confronting them. And that's one of the biggest issues. They don't want so-and-so to lose their job. So-and-so has a great reputation. So-and-so is a good person. He just made a mistake. I don't want to hear none of that garbage. I don't want to hear any of that. You need to go to jail. You need to be held accountable for what you've done. And the way that we failed young people whenever they've been mistreated, and I know that yours wasn't at a church or with church people, but you'll find out that if somebody commits a crime, the person who was in the car with them also is responsible. And for them to stand by and do nothing makes them equally responsible. Evil prevails when good men stand by and do nothing. And so if they stood by when you went to them and you pleaded with them for help, this happened. First off, one thing that I've learned, I just finished a course called Crisis Assessment and Counseling. And one of the things that we realize is that for women to go ahead and say, hey, like I've been raped, I've been molested, anything this happened, it takes women years to do that. Some people don't even, there's women that don't even, they happen when they're 15, and then it's not until they're 36 where they say, hey, this has happened to me. So for you to be 15 and be like, hey, this happened to me, help, is astronomical, because that's not the norm. That's not the norm. And so for that to happen, it takes a great deal of strength for someone to say that and to come to people where maybe they have a history of being judgmental or they have a history of not being understanding, and you come to them and say, hey, this happened to me, and for them to not respond is a fail. It's a fail. I'll never understand that. I'll never understand that. And so, but that's just my position, and that's how I view it.
Dr. Jake, as in your profession, like how would you have counseled someone in Nez's position?
Yeah, so I think first off, I agree. I think I am just really sorry to hear about the way that your church responded, because it's literally an example of what not to do. So I'm just really sad that that's the experience that you went through, Nez. And Pastor Zave, I 100% agree. I love to hear the way that you've described that you've engaged with the young people in your church, because I think that's the type of support that the church is supposed to give. And more than the support, the fact that it seems like you know your congregation. You know them beyond just being able to say, hey, on a Sunday morning, you know their lives, you know how they interact on a day-to-day basis. So I think that is in and of itself great leadership and shows that people would feel comfortable coming to you with mental health needs. I think from the clinical perspective, and Nez kind of touched on this a lot already, it's really understanding how has this experience impacted the person. And she kind of like shared whether that would be leading to PTSD, trauma. Yeah, it can really impact someone's personality type and could potentially lead to personality disorders. So first, you really start by really getting to understand how the person feels about the experience, how it's impacting them, and then kind of going from there, because there are lots of different types of, whether it be therapy. So you can have like cognitive behavioral therapy, there's exposure therapy. There are so many different types of therapies that people can use to address trauma in your life. And it's really that process of allowing the person to process and explore the experience, and then kind of going from there as you navigate as a clinician to really understand, okay, what's going to benefit this person? What's going to allow them to come out of this process still whole, or at least able to function in a way that allows them not to be blaming themselves, but to be able to kind of go through it stronger, honestly. And that's a lot of what therapy is for. It's a mindset shift in a lot of ways. So that's kind of how I would approach that clinically, of really just allowing the person to process and kind of giving them the therapy that is appropriate in that setting.
I like that you mentioned Dr. Jordan. I love interacting with current mental health professionals as I'm seeking to get there myself. And that's you said a word that I hear is mentioned a lot is functionality. Is that stuff like this usually cripples people into a place where they aren't able to function. And so, especially with crisis assessment, crisis counselors, they try to get people back to a place where they're at least functioning, and then they can, go over to a regular counselor. But I love that. That approach sounds super awesome. And thank you for sharing that.
I do want to clarify that this episode was said to them a little bit later in my life, but it's a huge story, so I can go into detail at some other point. But I do want to say I appreciate you guys and just giving that feedback and giving people the option to understand just an idea of what to do next. And knowing too, also, I want to put out there that I can recall having times of feeling some type of way in regards to this situation. And there was a lot of them that were kind of joined with it. And it was very much, again, my fault. Well, you're not leaving it at the cross. You got to leave it at the cross. You keep picking it up. But again, that's just another kind of point to think about when somebody's coming to you with some type of trauma, that we're not necessarily re-picking it up. It's that we've never really processed it in the first place. So it's going to stay there and be there in our face the whole time until we appropriately process it. And not that this experience will ever leave us, 100%, but it's not processed to understand what's happening to us. So if somebody comes to you with that, I keep having these thoughts, or these emotions keep coming forward for something, it's not that we're not leaving it at the cross, because I can tell you I've been at the altar or at the cross, or however you want to say it, a million times thinking like, okay, God, it's yours, and expecting things to be better and to be healed. But it's really a process. God sometimes heals like this, and sometimes God wants us to walk things out. And so we have to make sure that we understand that this process, the majority of the time, is definitely a healing process, and it takes time to be able to work through things, especially if we've held on to it for so long, because it grows into other things. It grows into insecurities and different thought processes and a little bit of craziness sometimes, you know, and it starts growing and growing. And as we start peeling things off, then God so graciously shows us different areas of our life. Okay, now she's ready to see this. Now she's ready to see this because she's walking things out. But it like I said, it just takes time, and just to support somebody in that journey and helping them gain their spirituality, not telling them that, oh, you're not spiritual enough, or you're not connected to God enough, you're not reading your Bible enough if you're still having these feelings. Rather seeing it as a way to help somebody connect to their spirituality even deeper with the Lord.
Yeah, and something I want to actually jump in on that. It's one of the things I've been loving to share recently. It's kind of helping people understand the difference between spiritual health and mental health. Because I think in a lot of these instances in the church, our leaders are pushing folks towards relying on spiritual health only when it's truly a mental health issue. And one of the things I really love to share is the fact that spiritual health and mental health are very different, but they are by nature very interconnected. So the ways that I kind of conceptualize spiritual health, I like to kind of boil it down to the idea of it's your sense of self, your sense of purpose, and then also your connection with God, connection with others, connection with nature. So it's this idea of a sense of self and purpose, and then your connections. But then your mental health, it's really thinking about your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior, and how those things kind of are impacted, whether by your genetics, your environment, society, things like that. So they're different, but then like I can give an example of how, for instance, like let's say you are really connected with God in terms of your spiritual health, and you're working on building up your connections through reading the Bible, worship, prayer, things like that. That can help your emotions, that can help your thoughts, that can help your behavior. So it's showing how those things are connected. But if your emotions and your thoughts and your behaviors are so shifted because let's say you've experienced trauma, or your biology is just different and you aren't able to cope as well, it's going to be harder for your spiritual health to support you if the mental health part isn't there.
So good. Mm-hmm.
And Coach Naz, I have a follow-up question. Dr. Jordan was just talking about how if you have a hard time coping with traumas and what that does to your spiritual health, how do you think not having the help you need affected your relationships? I know that you said that it took you within the last 2 years to overcome your trauma and to work through it. How did that affect your physical relationships with the church or with other people in your life?
Great question, because I feel that I am currently in a healing process, and that's why I feel that I am not called or connected to a church at this point in time. I feel that since I've stepped out of the church and just kind of been doing my own thing, I have the deepest, craziest connection with God right now. And so these types of things really brought me to a place where I always felt that I was the issue. And I mean, there's so many stories. So I'm that wild chick that's been married a couple of times, 3 times to be exact. My 3rd marriage right now with my husband is amazing. But even coming to people saying, I'm having issues in my marriage. And it's the same answers. You need to pray more. You need to submit more. You need to do all these things. And me, okay, I'm submitting. I'm sacrificing myself to a fault, right? I'm giving everything, thinking that I'm being Christ-like. But I never had that. I was never taught how to gain the individuality within Christ alone because of so many things of my background, that I over sacrificed, and I always listened to what other people were telling me that I needed to do in my marriages and with these relationships, because I've been a hot mess for a while, and I feel like that really contributed. Like I fasted for my marriages, I prayed, I did all of these things, and still I ended up in these divorces and abusive relationships and marriages. And it really, after my last marriage, I was just kind of done. I was like, hey, God, like, I know you're there. I know you love me. I know you exist because I've seen you in my life. But there's just certain things that aren't jiving with me. And so really taking that right now in my journey is just kind of separating and learning the word for myself and seeing what the reality of the word is saying versus what these people would tell me, that you need to submit more. When you have somebody that has endured so much trauma and is codependent and is unhealthy mentally, and you tell them to submit more, they think it's okay to allow their husband to do unnecessary things to them in their marriage because they're married and their body's no longer theirs and they're submitted to him now. And this is a sign of being with God, right? And so these things really, I was like, it's either one extreme to or the other for me. And I was extreme because I was thinking I was Christ-like because I was sacrificing myself. And it really left me at the end just kind of like, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with this. I don't want anything to do with the church because I used to be real active in the church. Both of my ex-husbands were leaders in the church. And so I was just really hurt and just kind of turned off by church as a whole. And now I'm relearning, and God has just been so graceful with me and just showing me how to process things. I have an amazing Christian counselor that's really working things out for me. Things that I thought I left, quote unquote, at the altar are still things that impact me till today and my thought process and how I think. And I've been diagnosed with a couple of things that I'm still working through, but it has not left me with a good taste in my mouth in regards to church, but I am working on it. And I do have a desire for God and his people and to help people. But it has been a process getting to this point. I guess I never lost my faith in God. I lost the faith in the church. And I ask God now to help me see and trust him how I'm supposed to, and to really gain that one-on-one relationship with God. Read the word for myself. I don't know how many times I've read the Bible and I'm like, that's not what I learned in the church. It's a completely different story from what I learned in the church. This is crazy. And I love connecting, like Jonah, how up and down he was and how God still used him, how Job was a hot mess, right? He got sick and all the things and just wanted to die. He was still favored. God still blessed him, and being able to see these things. And I'm like, I can be a hot mess and God can still use me. Yes, let's do this, So it's kind of helped me propel forward. But at the same time, it's just a growing process and really learning and connecting with God for himself, not because of the church, not what the pastor says, not what anybody says, because I'm really on this journey by myself. He has me secluded right now. But yeah, I hope that answered your question.
That also is a lot that I wanted to piggyback on, but I will ask this though. I've heard it said a lot of times where people will have to, when it comes to like situations like that in mental health, and Dr. J said something about spiritual, like you got to know between like the spiritual and stuff like that. It's like, how can we do that? Like, how can we differentiate between those two? Because a lot of times it goes to either extreme, right? And there's a lot of, I've heard, one of the craziest things I've heard was when somebody said that we don't need a therapist because we have our pastor, and our pastors are well equipped to address and help mental health issues because they have the Holy Spirit inside of them. And when I heard that, I rolled my eyes. But I'm just saying, it's like it's something that it's a thought that's very prevalent, and so I think it all ties into what we're talking about as well, because we don't draw that line between the spiritual and the natural. Like there's things that takes a spiritual application, and there's things that takes a natural application. And so, like, what would you say to that? Like I saw you guys just kind of rolled your eyes and shook your heads too when I said that, but like, what do you think about that?
So the way I see it, I think the way that I've always thought about it is that our lives are like a table. The table has 4 legs. In those 4 quadrants of those legs is like mental, spiritual, physical, emotional. If one of those things we're not giving, like, you have to invest in each one of those equally. It's not something where you can be like, okay, I'm just going to focus on my spiritual. but your emotional, your mental, and your physical health are drowning. That table won't stand.
Mm-hmm.
If you have two, unless they're on opposite sides of each other, it's still not gonna stand. With three, you can live with a table with three legs of that table. However, the table will still be incomplete. So as much as you invest in your spiritual, which people have told me, including pastors, that generally we're responsible for our own spiritual health.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are. Yeah, the church is there to help us and to guide us. We have pastors there to teach us the word for stuff we don't understand. We have all these other things. But generally, if we're not getting fed, if we're not being taught, if our spirits aren't feeling the convictions of what we're doing, even as people, like we're responsible for that. We're also responsible for our physical health. Like we're responsible for what we eat, what we drink, how we look, how our body structure is. Because if you don't feel like you look good when you leave the house in the morning, what happens? It messes with your mental. So now you have two things that's off. You don't think you look good, you don't feel good. Now your emotions are off. So it's like I look at it as a table. As much as you're investing in your spiritual health, you also have to invest in your emotional health, your mental health, as well as your physical. And you can do all those things. Get a Christian counselor. I have one too, thank God.
Yes.
Have a counselor. You can exercise, or even if you're not the exercising type, you can eat healthier foods or drink a smoothie every now and then, or add more fruits and vegetables to your thing. Your spiritual health. Yeah, going to church is great. Like being around leaders is great. Being in community is great. But in 2020, you can't be around your leaders or community as much as you can. So what do? You go to the word for yourself. You remember the things that you're taught. You allow the Holy Spirit to minister to you and to bring all things back to remembrance. And you study the Bible for yourself. If you have questions, hopefully the leaders are there to answer your questions. But it's like you have to invest in all of those things. It's not just you invest in one and you neglect everything else. And I know that most people are like, God is all you need and God is enough. He is, but with that, God made us stewards of our own bodies. So he wants us to make sure that we are presenting ourselves to him as a living sacrifice. And that means that you invest in all those areas of your life. It's not just you waiting for someone else to come do it. Sadly, we're not taught that as young adults or as kids growing up. In fact, most households, when things happen, we sweep it under the rug and act like we don't know what's going on. So people don't get the help that they need as children, as young adults, as all of that. So we carry all of this into our adult lives. And then when we're in our 30s or our late 20s or even 40s, we're trying to unpack every single thing that has happened since our childhood. And so it affects the relationships that we're building with other people because of all the mistreatments that we've allowed to build up because we weren't invested in ourselves. We allow anything to happen. So now we have to go to God for ourselves, have him unpack it, and we think it's an easy process to where it's like, okay, God, they said you was a healer, so heal me. I'm ready. Don't treat God like a genie. You took 30-something years to get to this place. Allow him to work through all of that with you, however that may look.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're soon to close and wrapping up. Once again, I appreciate every one of you who spent your time and your effort to join us today on the podcast to share your experiences with people you don't even know.
Yeah.
It's a great thing. Let me read you guys a scripture. St. Mark, because we've talked a lot about the church. St. Mark 23, 8th chapter 23 through 25. And it says this, and he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, King James Version, and he put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. And after that, he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up. And he was restored and saw every man clearly. I read that scripture in closing to let you guys know that when your perception of something changes, so does your value of whatever it is. be it good or bad. It's in your perception. That's the culture of it, of what we're dealing with. You have to understand one thing. Your mental health is everything to you. Your mental health is everything to you. And the perception, once that changes of how you look at your mental health, it's not about the church. It's not about your family. It's about your perception of how you look at things. And once that changes, then so does your value. In other words, how important you look at that. The conditions of your mind should always be the most important thing. You can't even serve God unless the condition of your mind changes. That's why Jesus asked him, now how do you see? How do you see it first? Well, I see myself as being just this. And Jesus touched him and prayed for him again. Then he asked him, now how do you see? He said, now I see men as they really are, because my perception and how I look at things changed. Now my value has gone up. I think of myself as being different. If you think of yourself as always being the victim, that's exactly what you're going to be. But if you look at yourself as being an overcomer, and you're listening to a young man who at the age of 7 years old was molested, who was made to perform oral sex on a teenage Caucasian boy. That's me. I could have stayed there throughout the rest of my life, or I could have looked at life different. And I value myself much more than what he did to me years ago. Now he's dead and gone. So that's on him. But I value myself much greater than that. I got too many more people to affect in a greater manner, and I got too much more life to live in a greater manner than to hold on to what happened to me. That was 50 years ago. Did it cause me to go certain ways? Yes, it did. Did it open up certain spiritual doors that I have to even deal with today? Yes, it does. But my mentality is different now because my mental health is the most important thing to me.
Sean, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you sharing that. And although I cannot share in your experiences that you've gone through, I think at the same time we have to be careful about the kind of I can definitely understand, like, hey, there's a shift in you got to shift your mentality. But when the war is in your mind in the first place, you know what I'm saying, that might not be as easy to do. You know what I'm saying? I praise God that you were able to come to that realization and say, man, I got to just shift my mindset and shift the way that I view things and change from being a victim to being an overcomer. But when someone is mentally disheveled and they don't know up from down or left from right, or it's I think we have to be careful about being insensitive, because sometimes it can sound like get over it. It can sound like deal with it. It can sound like just change it, just shift your mindset. You shift your mindset, you'll be fine. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that's what you said. I'm saying that's the danger we can approach with different people, because everyone. One thing that I've definitely learned in my personal journey here through just through group counseling or all the different things I've been able to learn is that everyone processes things differently. And every single counseling session has to be tailored to that individual person. You can't now, of course, there's solution focused theory and there's all these different stuff, and that can be used, but not everyone's not going to work on that very same thing. Different things work for different people. And that's why Dr. Jordan was mentioning different stuff. He's talking about exposure therapy and different ways, chair therapy, talk therapy. Some people use play therapy for kids, and there's all different ways, but I think we have to just be careful and just saying, just shift your mentality. And because I don't think that works for every single person. Again, I'm not saying that's what you said. I'm just saying that's the danger in and where we're going. Because I think it can, if we're not careful, we can be insensitive to the fact that people are in a different place in the battle than we are. And
I think
we don't want to
that
dismiss someone and make them feel like their experiences are invalidated because they didn't take the same road to healing that we did. That's all.
I think the point I was trying to really make was the fact that because of the help, because the blind man, he had enough sense to go get help. And that's the key that I'm really trying to present to you guys, that when you're dealing with mental issues, whether it be if you go to Jesus or if you go to Dr. J, the key is to get the help. There's nothing wrong with getting the help. And that's the issue I was really trying to make. That's why your value goes up, because you value yourself enough to see and to understand that I need help. And we can put so much of our faith in men in the church. And that's the reason why a lot of times we get some of the results that we get, because we put so much of our faith in just the men in the church, when there's professionals out there that can help you when you deal with your mental issues. There's professionals in the church, there's professionals out of the church, and we have to be able to relate to the people that it's no problem. There's nothing wrong. You're not spiritual, you're not unspiritual, and you're not some demon because you go get the help.
Yeah, if I can interject, I just finished an assignment. I just finished a 20-page paper on all 8 types of depression. And in the church, what I've seen is the 2 major mental health issues that I see happening in the church is depression and anxiety. Those are the 2 biggest ones I see happening in the church. Both of those mental health issues are isolating issues. They say no one wants to hear my problems. They cause you to isolate. They cause you to feel hollow. They cause you to feel unimportant. They cause you to feel like no one cares. And are those things true? No. But when that's in your mind, it's harder. That's why I think at the same time, being able to recognize signs of depression. Kofi, I told you before we got on today that last night I was hanging out with 2 of the girls. My wife and I were hanging out with 2 of the girls from the youth department. And one of the girls was shut down the entire time. Well, I just finished doing 8 types of depression, and I was able to recognize all the signs that I saw that she was going through. You know what I'm saying? And so I said, "Hey, are you okay?" She said, "Yeah, but I knew better." And what happened? She texted me later, and what I found out, she's been going to therapy. She got this stuff going on. The reason she kept getting up and going to the bathroom was because she was crying. You know what I'm saying? And being able to have people to recognize the signs as well. And so I think we have to be careful with saying you have to have enough sense to go get help, because a lot of mental issues cause you to isolate. And that's why I say the war happens in your mind, is to be able for her to come to yesterday to hang out with us was a big deal, because she's been struggling to get out of bed. It takes a lot of energy to muster up to be able to do a lot of those things. And that's why I came back and I kind of said, we have to be careful on the way that we approach people and their healing. And maybe it's just semantics, and maybe, the way that we word things is different, but it's just that, it takes a lot of strength to even go get help. It's not that they don't care about themselves. It's that it's hard. If I can be transparent, I've suffered with depression, and I've been on the suicidal things twice in my life, right? 2 times, and both times, and that's why I was able to identify with her and know what was going on, because you feel hollow, you're tired, but you can't sleep, you're mentally drained. Just to smile so people don't ask you questions takes a lot out of you, and let alone go and tell somebody you need help. That's hard. It takes a lot of strength. And you're right. That's what needs to be. That's what happens, Sean. You need to be able to go tell someone. But to get to that place, to be able to go and tell someone, is such a big deal, because it's hard to do, especially when your mind is saying no one cares, nobody wants to talk to me, no one's going to care about my problems, no one's going to take me seriously. And although those things are not true, that's what our mind is telling us. So that's why I said the war is waged in your mind. You know what I'm saying? And you got to be able to get past that. Now, of course, I'm a pastor. I know plenty of scripture about what the Bible says about the mind and how to handle it. But that doesn't take away from the practical part, that even though you have to cast down every high thought that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, it still takes energy to get to that place. It's hard to do. The Bible says that there were the demon that was existing in the house, and he left the house, and when he came back, he found out it was empty. So he went back and got 7 more friends, and they had a party in the house. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to get to that place where you can and your mental health, your mental aptitude affects all other areas of your life. If you are mentally exhausted, you will be spiritually exhausted, you will be emotionally exhausted, you will be physically exhausted. It will sap you dry.
Say that again, because we lost you.
I said your mental health, your mental aptitude affects your spiritual, your emotional, your physical, because it'll drain you. It'll drain you, and when it drains you, it's hard to do any of those things. I was over here. If I can be transparent, I don't mind being transparent. I was struggling with depression this year. We talk about people now. What happens when the leader of the church is battling it? Now, praise God, like I know that I'm prone to it, and so I know I take necessary steps to make sure that it's dealt with. And I got people that I can talk to, and mental health professionals that I can kind of help, push me along. But I also know what I have to do in order to get through it. Not everybody is that far. Not everybody is that far, and it takes a lot to get there. So I didn't mean to monopolize, but I thought you made some great points, Sean. I didn't want to feel like I was trying to discredit what you were saying, just adding some asterisks. That's all.
Yeah, just to add on to that, and then like we can talk about this all day. We might have to do a part two. It just depends on everybody's availability. But just to your point about the leader having battling depression, I remember it was like last year or the year before, there was a pretty prominent pastor who was a very strong advocate of mental health, battling depression, and he ended up committing suicide. I forget his name, it escapes me, but it's a pretty big deal. It was a white guy, and he had enough, and he just ended up taking his own life. But mental health and getting the help that we need, and actually having that sense of community and not being shunned as a person seeks help should be one of our priorities right now. And one of the things we do a lot is we do shun, and we shun and fear things we don't really understand. And I'm not saying everybody do it because they're evil. No, it's like I think that it's because we don't understand fully, and people just react the best way that they know how. But we are like way over time, and I will definitely love if you guys will love to be back to actually maybe do a part two of this, because there's clearly a lot on the table that's left to be said. But I just do want to thank you all for coming out and giving up your Saturday morning to share your stories and your expertise and whatnot. But yeah, like I said, it's a lot. It's heavy, and as the church, we do, and as people, we need to be more comforting, more empathetic, and encouraging people to seek mental health. And if you know someone that needs help, encourage them to go find a professional. And I will ask the last question. Yes, and I will ask his last question, and then we're going to leave for sure. Do you think, as a Christian, it's important for a Christian to seek a Christian therapist?
I think if you are able to find someone who is Christian, I think that can be helpful. But the resources are so scarce to be able to just find a therapist in general. I think any therapist is better than no therapist. But if you can find a Christian therapist, that'll help you to be able to connect on that Christian experience. But it's not at all necessary for therapy to be useful.
I agree. Most counselors, good counselors, they are educated on cultural differences, religious differences, and they would be able to support you in your spirituality, in whatever religion or however you feel. So a good counselor will be able to do that. They don't necessarily have to be Christian. It's always kudos, though, if they are, of course, because then you can really get deep on certain things. But it's absolutely not a necessity for them to be a Christian. Like Doctor was saying, it's kind of hard these days right now. People are maxed out. And so whatever you can get into until maybe you find somebody that is a better suit for you, but some counseling is better than none.
I agree. And just to piggyback on what you both said, a great therapist. One of the things that they're teaching us in school is that you're not allowed to take a religious approach unless the door is open for you, or unless, like in what's called informed consent, they talk about it and you can use that as an in, but you're not allowed to even talk about those things without client permission. And but a good therapist will be able to implement principles, even though they don't directly state it. And so a good therapist needs to be tailoring, like we mentioned before, tailoring their tailoring the therapeutic alliance to you specifically. So if they pick on that you're a religious person, they probably will help you steer toward religious outcomes in order for you to do it. So the fear is that Christianity and science don't mix, and I believe that they work in tandem. So should a Christian go get therapy? Absolutely.
JV?
I agree with everything that was said. Because even if you go find a Christian counselor, there's a chance that that person could change their minds about being a Christian. I mean, you see many turning from the faith now. So I don't think it's necessary to have a therapist who is not a Christian, but I would say it definitely helps to have one that has the same morals and values and convictions that you do.
All right. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being here. And I look forward to doing this again. And thank you for listening to the first episode ever of Houston Got a Problem. Whoop, whoop.
You guys take care.
Houston, we got a problem. Who at fault when you fall with your heart, man?